explosives. Falling short have been reported over Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Syria, sending debris into populated areas, sowing fear and uncertainty. Any further expansion of the conflict could have enormous consequences for the region and for international peace and security at large. The fallout of the conflict is also economic. We cannot discount the global impact of a potential disruption of trade through the Strait of Hormuz, described by the World Bank as the world's most critical oil passageway. Trade through this vital route has already fallen by 15% amid heightened tensions starting in late 2023. Madam President, International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Grossi will address this council shortly. Allow me at this juncture to express our appreciation to the IAEA and its staff still on the ground in Iran. We also convey our deepest gratitude to our colleagues who have continued to stay and deliver. At the center of the ongoing conflict are concerns about Iran's nuclear program. As the Secretary General has stated, the best way to address these concerns is through dialogue leading to a negotiated solution. But the window to prevent a catastrophic escalation and achieve a peaceful resolution has not yet closed, as demonstrated by positive recent openings for diplomacy. We welcome in this regard the talks between the foreign ministers of France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and Iran in Geneva today. We strongly encourage such efforts. We must pursue every possible opportunity to de-escalate, to cease the hostilities, to settle disputes by peaceful means. The charter that binds all of us mandates it. The imperative for diplomacy has seldom been greater. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Ms. Di Carlo for her briefing, and I now give the floor to Mr. Rafael Mariano Grossi.
Thank you very much, Madam President, dear Secretary General, dear Madam Under-Secretary General, dear friends. Attacks on nuclear sites in the Islamic Republic of Iran have caused a sharp degradation in nuclear safety and security in Iran. Though they have not so far led to a radiological release affecting the public, there is a danger this could occur. The IAEA has been monitoring closely the situation at Iran's nuclear sites since Israel began its attacks a week ago. As part of its mission, the IAEA is the global nerve center for information on nuclear and radiological safety, and we can respond to any nuclear or radiological emergency. Based on information available to the IAEA, the following is the current situation at Iran's nuclear sites, which I offer as a follow-up to my most recent report to this Security Council. The Natanz enrichment site contains two facilities. The first is the main fuel enrichment plant. The initial attacks on the 13th of June targeted and destroyed electricity infrastructure at the facility, including an electrical substation, the main electric power supply building, an emergency power supply, and backup generators. On the same day, the main cascade hall appears to have been attacked using ground-penetrating munitions. Second facility at Natanz is the pilot fuel enrichment plant. It consists of above-ground and underground cascade halls. On the 13th of June, the above-ground part was functionally destroyed, and the strikes on the underground cascade halls were seriously damaging. The level of radioactivity outside the Natanz site has remained unchanged and at normal levels, indicating no external radiological impact on the population or the environment there. However, within the Natanz facility, there is both radiological and chemical contamination. It is possible that uranium isotopes contained in uranium hexafluoride, uranyl fluoride, and hydrogen fluoride are dispersed inside the facility. The radiation, primarily consisting of alpha particles, poses a significant danger if inhaled or digested. This risk can be effectively managed with appropriate protective measures, such as using respiratory devices. The main concern inside the facility is chemical toxicity. Fordow is Iran's main enrichment location for enriching uranium at 60%. The agency is not aware of any damage at Fordow at this time. At the Esfahan nuclear site, 4 buildings were damaged in last Friday's attack: the Central Chemical Laboratory, a uranium conversion plant, the Tehran reactor fuel manufacturing plant, and the enriched uranium metal processing facility, which was under construction. No increase of off-site radiation levels was reported. In Natanz, the main concern here is chemical toxicity. The Condab heavy water research reactor under construction in Arak was hit on the 19th of June. As the reactor was not operational and it did not contain any nuclear material, no radiological consequence is expected. The nearby heavy water production plant is also assessed to have been hit. And similarly, no radiological consequence is expected. As stated in the IEA's update of 18th June, at the Tehran Research Center, 1 building where advanced centrifuge rotors were manufactured and tested was hit. At the Karaj workshop, 2 buildings where different centrifuge components were manufactured were destroyed. There was no radiological impact internally or externally. Let me now refer to the Bushehr nuclear power plant. This is the nuclear site in Iran where the consequences of an attack could be most serious. It is an operating nuclear power plant, and as such, it hosts thousands of kilograms of nuclear material. Countries of the region have reached out directly to me over the past few hours to express their concerns, and I want to make it absolutely and completely clear. In case of an attack on the Bushehr nuclear power plant, a direct hit would result in a very high release of radioactivity to the environment. Similarly, a hit that disabled the only 2 lines supplying electrical power to the plant could cause its reactor's core to melt, which could result in a high release of radioactivity to the environment. In the worst case, both scenarios would necessitate protective actions, such as evacuations and sheltering of the population, or the need to take stable iodine with a reach extending to distances from a few to several hundred kilometers. Radiation monitoring would need to cover distances of several hundred kilometers, and food restrictions may need to be implemented. Any action against the Tehran nuclear research reactor could also have severe consequences, potentially for large areas of the city of Tehran and its inhabitants. In such a case, protective actions would need to be taken. I continue to provide public updates about the developments at all these sites and their possible health and environmental consequences. The agency is, as Madam Undersecretary had kindly reminded, is and will remain present in Iran, and inspections there will resume as required by Iran's safeguards obligations under its NPT safeguards agreement as soon as safety and security conditions allow. In this context, let me restate that the safety of our inspectors is of utmost importance. The host country has a responsibility in this regard, and we expect every effort to be made to ensure that their security and their communication lines with the IAEA headquarters will be maintained. As stated in my most recent report to the agency's Board of Governors, and based on inspections conducted at the relevant facilities since then, Iran's uranium stockpiles remain under safeguards in accordance with Iran's comprehensive safeguards agreement. You may recall that more than 400 kilograms of this stockpile is uranium enriched up to 60% of uranium-235. It is essential that the agency resumes inspections as soon as possible to provide credible assurances that none of it has been diverted. Importantly, any special measures by Iran to protect its nuclear material and equipment must be done in accordance with Iran's safeguards obligation and the agency. Therefore, it is of paramount importance that the agency's inspectors are allowed to verify that all relevant materials, especially those enriched to 60%, are accounted for. Beyond the potential radiological risks, attacks on such materials would make this effort, of course, more difficult. Madam President, the IAEA has consistently underlined, as stated in its General Conference resolutions, that armed attacks on nuclear facilities should never take place and could result in radioactive releases with grave consequences within and beyond the boundaries of the state which has been attacked. I therefore, again, call on maximum restraint. Military escalation threatens lives and delays indispensable work towards a diplomatic solution for the long-term assurance that Iran does not acquire a nuclear weapon. Madam President, the presence, support, analysis and inspections of technical experts are crucial to mitigating risks to nuclear safety and security. That is true during peacetime and even more so during military conflict. For the second time in 3 years, we are witnessing a dramatic conflict between two UN and IAEA member states in which nuclear installations are coming under fire and nuclear safety is being compromised. The IAEA, just as has been the case with the military conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, will not stand idle during this conflict. As I stated in this chamber just a few days ago, I am ready to travel immediately and to engage with all relevant parties to help ensure the protection of nuclear facilities and the continued peaceful use of nuclear technology in accordance with the agency mandate, including by deploying agency nuclear safety and security experts, in addition to our safeguards inspectors in Iran, wherever necessary. For the IAEA to act, a constructive professional dialogue is needed. I urge the members of this council to support us in making it happen sooner rather than later. The IAEA must receive timely and regular technical information about affected nuclear facilities and their respective sites. I urge in this regard the Iranian regulatory authorities to continue a constructive dialogue with the IAEA Incident and Emergency Center, which has been operating 24/7 since the beginning of this conflict. Nuclear facilities and material must not be shrouded by the fog of war. Yesterday, there was an incorrect statement to the media by an Israeli military official that the Bushehr nuclear power plant had been attacked. Though the mistake was quickly identified and the statement retracted, the situation underscored the vital need for clear and accurate communication and the agency's unique role in providing it in a technically accurate and politically impartial way is obvious. Let me conclude by assuring the international community of the IAEA's continued support at this very grave time. A diplomatic solution is within reach if the necessary political will is there. Elements for an agreement have been discussed. The IAEA can guarantee through a watertight inspection system that nuclear weapons will not be developed in Iran. They can form the basis of a long-standing agreement that brings peace and avoids a nuclear crisis in the Middle East. This opportunity should not be missed. The alternative would be a protracted conflict and a looming threat of nuclear proliferation that, while emanating from the Middle East, would effectively erode the NPT and the non-proliferation regime as a whole. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Grossi for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. President, I thank you for convening this emergency open meeting. I thank Secretary General Guterres for his statement and support his call for an end to the fighting and the return to diplomatic negotiations. I thank Undersecretary General De Carlo and Director General Grossi for their briefings. As the Israel-Iran military conflict enters its 8th day, it is distressing to note that it has resulted in a large number of civilian casualties and damage to facilities on both sides. If the conflict escalates further, not only will both sides suffer greater losses, but the regional countries will also be severely affected. Israel's actions violate international law and the norms of international relations, jeopardize sovereignty and security of Iran, and undermine regional peace and stability. China unequivocally condemns this. Chinese President Xi Jinping has put forward a 4-point proposal regarding the current situation. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has spoken separately with his counterparts of Iran, Israel, and the regional countries. At this critical juncture, the international community should further forge a consensus and make every effort to promote talks to ease tension. I will make 4 points. First, there must be an immediate ceasefire and an end to fighting. The use of force is not the right way to resolve international disputes. It will only exacerbate hatred and conflicts. The sooner a ceasefire is put in place, the less damage will be done. The situation in the region cannot be allowed to slide into an unknown abyss. The parties to the conflict, Israel in particular, should cease fire as soon as possible to prevent the situation from escalating and to avoid any spillover of the war. Second, the safety of civilians must be ensured. The red line of protecting civilians in armed conflicts must not be crossed at any time, and the indiscriminate use of force is unacceptable. The parties to the conflict must strictly abide by international law, resolutely avoid harming innocent civilians, refrain from attacking civilian facilities, and facilitate the evacuation of third country nationals. Third, we must stay committed to dialogue and negotiation. Communication and dialogue are the right paths to lasting peace. The current conflict has interrupted the negotiation process on the Iranian nuclear issue. The attacks on multiple Iranian nuclear facilities set a dangerous precedent and could have catastrophic consequences. We must not waver in the general direction of a political settlement to the Iranian nuclear issue, and we must persist in returning the Iranian nuclear issue to the track of a political solution through dialogue and negotiation. China welcomes the talk in Geneva among foreign ministers of UK, France, Germany, and the High Representative of EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and the Foreign Minister of Iran. Fourth, we must bring together the efforts of the international community to promote peace. Without stability in the Middle East, peace in the world would be elusive. The Israel-Iran conflict has led to a sudden escalation of tension in the Middle East and has also had a serious impact on global security. Recently, 21 Arab and Islamic countries issued a joint statement of foreign ministers calling for a ceasefire, resuming talks on the Iranian nuclear issue, and maintaining lasting peace in the region, which China fully supports. The international community, especially major countries with special influence on the parties to the conflict, should make efforts to cool down the situation rather than the opposite. The Security Council, as the primary body responsible for maintaining international peace and security, should play a greater role in this regard. We support the Council in taking necessary actions in a timely fashion. China stands ready to continue to strengthen communication and coordination with all relevant parties, build synergies, uphold justice, and play a constructive role in restoring peace in the Middle East. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Secretary General Guterres for his presence and thoughtful and compelling remarks. Secretary General, you spoke about a defining moment and our collective future, as well as collective responsibility. And we fully agree with you and your call to give peace a chance. And in that context, your appeal to end the fighting and return to negotiations. I'm also thankful to Undersecretary General Di Carlo for her complimentary briefing, as well as the briefing by Director General Grossi. We note in particular his view that diplomatic solution is within reach with necessary political will. Madam President, last Friday, the Council had an emergency session in the wake of Israel's military strikes, violating the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Iran in flagrant violation and contravention of the UN Charter and fundamental principles of international law. 1 week later, as a result of such irresponsible behavior, the situation has only exacerbated, with grave implications for regional and international peace and security. Pakistan strongly condemns the unjustified and illegitimate aggression by Israel. We stand in solidarity with the people of Iran. We unequivocally denounce the blatant attacks and military strikes carried out by Israel, which constitute a grave danger and a serious threat to the peace, security, and stability of the entire region and beyond, with serious implications. We offer our sincere condolences and sympathies to the brotherly people of Iran on the loss of life as a result of these unprovoked attacks. The ensuing humanitarian crisis and civilian toll on both sides is also deplorable. International humanitarian law must be complied by all sides. The attacks against nuclear facilities for peaceful purposes are deeply troubling. Such attacks contravene international law, the Charter of the UN, Statute of the IAEA, and relevant IAEA General Conference resolutions on the issue. It is the responsibility of the IAEA to clearly pronounce its legal position with regard to such attacks, as well as to report it to the Board of Governors and to the Security Council about the legal safeguards, safety, and security implications of such attacks. The agency should fulfill that responsibility. Madam President, the latest crisis has aggravated the existing tensions in the region, arising from Israel's continuing ruthless assault on Gaza, that has resulted in an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe for the innocent Palestinians, as well as its recurring violations of international law in Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. The Security Council bears primary responsibility to immediately stop this wanton aggression and hold the aggressor accountable for its actions. The Security Council must fulfill its duty and affirm the following. First, categorical rejection and condemnation of Israel's attacks on the Islamic Republic of Iran since 13th of June and all actions that contravene international law and the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Second, play its due role to end the hostilities and promote de-escalation for achieving a comprehensive ceasefire before the situation spirals out of control and threatens the peace and stability of the entire region. Third, clear denunciation of the targeting of IAEA safeguarded nuclear facilities against the provisions of international law and the UN Charter as reflected in the UN Security Council resolutions, IAEA resolutions, and international humanitarian law, including the Geneva Conventions. The Security Council must implement its own resolution 487. Fourth, call for dialogue and diplomacy to promote a peaceful and lasting resolution of the crisis. Diplomacy must be given a chance. Madam President, regrettably, Israeli unlawful strikes against Iran came at the time of intense diplomatic engagement on Iran's nuclear issue. These illegal actions must not be allowed to scuttle that dialogue. Parties must swiftly return to the path of negotiations, which is the only viable means to reach a sustainable agreement regarding the Iranian nuclear program. We note the willingness expressed by the United States to keep the door for negotiations open. We also take note of the dialogue between the E3 and Iran. We hope that the diplomatic efforts and engagements will bear fruit. We reaffirm our long-standing position that all issues concerning Iran's nuclear program must be resolved peacefully through dialogue and diplomacy in accordance with the rights, international obligations, and responsibilities of all the parties concerned. At the same time, verification activities by the IAEA as the competent international technical organization mandated to implement respective safeguards obligations should continue unimpeded. The IAEA must continue its work in an impartial and apolitical manner to provide objective reporting and credible information regarding the issues under its purview. Madam President, this is a critical moment. The Security Council must fulfill its responsibility and facilitate peaceful resolution of disputes. Military means and coercion cannot bring about a lasting settlement. Dialogue and diplomacy, in full adherence to the principles of international law and the UN Charter, remain the only viable path to resolving this crisis. This Council must therefore unite in support of the Secretary General's call for end to fighting and return to negotiations and dialogue. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, we are grateful to the Guyanan presidency for the prompt response to the request from Russia, China, Pakistan, and Algeria to convene this meeting. We thank the UN Secretary General for his opening remarks, as well as the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs and the Director of the IAEA for their briefings. Madam President, exactly a week has elapsed since the start of the escalation of the Iran-Israeli conflict, which the Security Council discussed on the 13th of June. In this time, the world has been flooded with images depicting the night skies over Tel Aviv and Tehran and other cities lit up with explosions of tens and hundreds of rockets. The apocalyptic predictions have become a reality. People in both countries have been forced to take shelter in hideouts with each passing day. The list of civilian casualties on both sides lengthens. As a result of the closure of the airspace in the region, many third country civilians have become entrapped and they are striving to find a way home. The Iranian peaceful civilian nuclear facilities continue to be targeted, and this is liable to plunge us into a hitherto unseen nuclear catastrophe. The UN Security Council, the principal body for the maintenance of international peace and security, cannot shirk its responsibility and must provide an objective assessment of the situation and to devise an appropriate solution or decision. We cannot deny the obvious facts. It is indeed Israel which attacked Iran on the eve of the latest planned round of indirect talks between Washington and Tehran. Thereby, West Jerusalem not only demonstrated blatant disregard for the efforts that have been undertaken to seek a diplomatic solution to issues around the Iranian nuclear program, but also demonstrated contempt for its key ally, the United States, which up until recently had been declaring an intent to reach a compromise solution on this matter. It is worth recalling that the Iranian nuclear program is not a scroll secured by 7 seals, indiscernible to the international community. The nuclear facilities and installations in this country are under the safeguards of the IAEA and are continuously subject to scrupulous verification by agency inspectors. Not a single of the member states of this body is under more stringent oversight and scrutiny. Iran has been strictly complying with its obligations under the NPT and the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. The Secretariat of the agency's reports have no mention whatsoever about the presence of proliferation risks. So it turns out that Israel has disregarded the assessments of the Specialized International Agency, having on its own authority appointed itself a judge, single-handedly deciding to carry out strikes against a sovereign country with no regard for the UN Charter and international law. Just recently, in the Middle East, a tragic precedent occurred of an invasion into a state under the pretext of alleged presence there of WMDs, which subsequently failed to materialize. It's a pity that the United States, which demonstrated to the entire world this discredited example in 2003, which generated suffering for millions of people, does not wish to learn from its own mistakes. Today, the U.S., yet again, together with the U.K., France, and Germany, is attempting to persuade all parties to believe the groundless fabrications about plans allegedly harbored by Tehran to gain possession of nuclear weapons. Nor can we forget the fact that the attack on Iran was carried out at the time when the entire world observed with horror the ongoing man-made disaster which was unfolding in Gaza and continues to unfold in Gaza, and was condemned the ongoing humanitarian blockade of the Strip and was awaiting the high-level conference in support of the two-state formula under the aegis of the United Nations in accordance with General Assembly resolutions. Instead of reverting back to the sole possible negotiated peaceful settlement in Palestine, Israeli military political leadership raised the stakes and expanded the geography of the conflict in the region. Perhaps the Western Jerusalem's calculations also are to have the new military misadventure detract the international community's attention away from the crimes perpetrated by Tzahal in Gaza and the West Bank. We have seen highly perilous attempts to drag third countries into this confrontation, and this, as was rightly noted by the Secretary General, would have colossal consequences, not just for the stakeholders and the parties engaged, but for the entire region, international peace and security as a whole. We concur with Mr. Guterres' position about the need to avoid internationalization of the conflict. Madam President, the present escalation around Iran did not start yesterday. Having attacked the country, Israel first received a direct pass from a host of Western states. The rhetoric uttered by British, French, and German diplomats in the lofty chambers of the UN Security Council and the IAEA Board of Governors are equally dangerous, just as dangerous as the deadliest weaponry. The blatant blackmail of the leadership of the agency in order to compel it to draft a vague so-called comprehensive assessment on the Iranian nuclear program. program, pushing through biased anti-Iranian resolutions at the IAEA Board of Governors. All of this made those countries effectively complicit in the Israeli aggression. Let's recall that this specific IAEA report was one of the justifications used by Israeli leadership for the attack on Iraq. What is telling in this connection is a cynical statement from the German Chancellor, Mr. Merz, about, and I quote, Israel doing the dirty work for us. End of quote. The fact that the launch buttons are being pressed by West Jerusalem does not absolve Washington, London, Paris, and Berlin from responsibility for what is taking place. Russia views the ongoing intense Israeli attacks targeting civilian objects in Iran as completely unacceptable and unlawful under international law. As a result of these reckless actions, unacceptable threats are being posed to international peace and security. Nuclear facilities cannot be targeted by strikes. We demand that West Jerusalem immediately cease attacks and raids on Iran, first and foremost the nuclear facilities which are under the protection of the IAEA. We expect that the agency leadership will draft in short order a detailed written report and response to the reports for consideration of the IAEA Board of Governors and the Security Council with a frank assessment of the damage sustained by Iran's nuclear and energy facilities, as well as the safeguards application in that country, including in the context of the presence of inspectors there, inspectors whose lives were under imminent threat. We take note of the clear Iranian statements about its steadfast commitment to obligations under the NPT and the willingness to resume contact with Washington to forge possible solutions that dispel all baseless suspicions and biases vis-à-vis Tehran's nuclear program under the condition that Israeli attacks cease. We support this position. We share the Secretary General's call for an immediate de-escalation resulting in a ceasefire. We firmly believe that a resolution can be provided for in a sustainable way only through diplomacy and negotiations. The goals of nuclear nonproliferation, whose cornerstone is the NPT, cannot and must not be attained through aggression at the cost of innocent lives. We believe that solutions whereby Iran's right to peaceful nuclear activity and Israel's unconditional safety and security will simultaneously be upheld are feasible and attainable. We have conveyed these options to our U.S. and Israeli colleagues as well as Iranian partners. We stand ready to provide them with the necessary assistance in seeking solutions that are acceptable to all. For now, we still have an opportunity to avoid another devastating war that would have unpredictable repercussions for the entire region and world. We stand ready to seek relevant solutions and decisions at the UN Security Council to engage constructively with all parties who genuinely advocate diplomacy and dialogue. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. First, I wish to express our appreciation to you for convening this urgent meeting, the second within a week, which underscores the seriousness of the situation before us. I thank the Secretary General for his remark and his personal engagement toward peace and stability in the region. And we echo your call for dialogue and for ending the fighting. I also thank USG DiCarlo and Director General Grossi for their briefings. Madam President, Israel's attack against Iran is an unprovoked and unjustified act. It constitutes a flagrant violation of the Charter of the United Nations. This is an attack on nuclear facilities under IAEA safeguard. If these guarantees and even the presence on the ground of international inspectors cannot guarantee the protection of such installations. Then the credibility of the entire nuclear non-proliferation regime is called into question. If those entrusted with upholding this regime are unable or unwilling to condemn and denounce such violations, they must ask themselves, what is their purpose? And are they truly fulfilling their responsibilities? We must resist any attempt to justify what in essence is an act of aggression against a sovereign member state of the United Nations. Any misleading narrative is unacceptable. As Director General Grossi stated in an interview with CNN, we, the IEA, did not have any proof of a systematic effort to move into a nuclear weapon, end of quote. These words merit our full attention. Madam President, it is imperative that everyone returns to a path of reason. Negotiation between the E3, the European three, and Iran. Negotiation between US and Iran with the facilitation of Oman remain a viable and a constructive option available for diplomacy. Algeria has always believed in the power of dialogue, and we echo the call of the Secretary General in this regard. Even in time of heightening tension, mediation and Charter's principle remain our unique, viable tools. Let me quote the Charter. All members shall settle their international dispute by peaceful means, end of quote. Madam President, international humanitarian law is clear. Nuclear power plant enjoy specific protection and shall not be made the object of attack. Attacks against such facilities are prohibited. If there remains a risk of radioactive material spreading from the impacted facilities, the potential danger extends well beyond borders, endangering civilian populations across the region. For my country, Algeria, there can be no double standard, no double standards when it comes to respecting international humanitarian law. Civilian and civilian infrastructure must be protected everywhere and under all circumstances. We have consistently warned against violation of international humanitarian law, notably in Gaza, where tragically violating IHL became the norm Today, the same patterns of conduct are being repeated and repeated again. When we reiterate in the strongest term our condemnation of all violation of international humanitarian law, the protection of civilians is not optional. It is an obligation. Upholding international humanitarian law is a matter of preserving our shared humanity. However, those responsible for the collapse of the health system in Gaza, for the killing of 1,580 health workers, for the killing of over 18,000 children and more than 10,000 women, for the killing of 225 journalists, and for the killing of 467 humanitarian workers, cannot credibly claim to be upholding international humanitarian law. Madam President, no measures can substitute for the responsibility that rests with this Council. In 1981, following the Israeli attack on Iraq's Oziraq, remember, this very Council unanimously adopted Resolution 487. It's true, this resolution was never really implemented. And Israel's nuclear facilities were never placed under IAEA safeguards. And Iraq never received any compensation. And the Council, this very Council, was never properly informed of follow-up measures. This is to show that the legacy of impunity, the legacy of immunity, has dangerous consequences. What we are witnessing today is not simply an isolated act of aggression. It is a profound challenge to the very foundations of the international legal order. The Security Council must fulfill its mandate. Acts that threaten international peace and security demand an adequate response. Inaction should not and cannot be an option. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, let me express my gratitude to Guyana for swiftly convening today's meeting at this critical juncture. I thank the Secretary General for his important statement and compelling message. I also appreciate USGT Carlo and IAEA Director General Grossi for their informative briefings. I reiterate our deepest concern over this dangerous escalation of conflict in the Middle East. Despite the unanimous calls for maximum restraint during last Friday's Council meeting, we regret that Israel and Iran have continued to exchange attacks, putting the safety and security of their own people at grave risk. the government of the Republic of Korea condemns all actions that further aggravate the worsening situation. Over the past week, both Iran and Israel have carried out repeated and large-scale missile and drone strikes against each other's military assets and critical infrastructure, resulting in widespread destruction and a growing number of casualties, including many civilians. Should this vicious cycle of mutual retaliation persist, not only the peoples of Iran and Israel, but also millions of in neighboring states and beyond could face intensifying threats to their safety and livelihoods. The region's instability is also generating negative impacts on maritime security, as well as on global energy markets and supply chains, risking the economic security of the whole world. Madam President, in recent days, we have repeatedly heard the positions of both sides. What is important, however, is that all member states should respect the international law and the UN Charter, uphold the global non-proliferation regime, and work towards the promotion of international peace and stability. This is precisely the core mandate of the Security Council and the very reason we have reconvened here today. As repeatedly voiced in this chamber, the protection of civilians in armed conflicts is not optional. This is a legal obligation and a moral imperative we cannot afford to neglect. The indiscriminate use of explosive weapons in populated areas and on civilian facilities, including hospitals, must cease immediately. In addition, we reiterate concerns that attacks on nuclear facilities can have serious implications for nuclear safety, security, and safeguards. In this regard, we commend the IAEA's prompt establishment of a task force and continued reporting on the management of affected facilities. Appropriate assessments by the IAEA of potential risks, such as radioactive releases from further possible attacks on nuclear facilities, would be highly welcomed. Madam President, as a country that has long faced mounting nuclear and missile threats from its neighbor, the Republic of Korea does not view this situation as a distant issue confined to the Middle East. The international community remains unconvinced of the exclusively peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program, and this issue should be clearly addressed. We must take the grave consequences of potential nuclear proliferation seriously. At the same time, we should recognize that military measures cannot be the ultimate solution to addressing proliferation concerns or securing long-term peace and security anywhere in the world. How Iran's nuclear issue is resolved carries significant implications for us all. We take note that the key parties have publicly maintained that they remain open to diplomacy. We sincerely hope that the talks among the foreign ministers of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Iran in Geneva today will achieve a timely outcome to navigate through this precarious situation and open another window for diplomacy. The Republic of Korea implores all parties to exercise both wisdom and determination to urgently resolve these immensely tough challenges. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Secretary General, for your introductory remarks, and Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo and Director General Rafael Grossi for your briefings. DG Grossi, we commend the IAEA team for their professionalism in implementing the agency's critical responsibilities, especially during this complex and evolving situation. Colleagues, we meet at a decisive moment in the Middle East. convening amid an intensifying conflict between Israel and Iran. It is not too late for the government of Iran to do the right thing. President Trump has been clear in recent days that Iran's leadership must completely abandon its nuclear enrichment program and all aspirations of acquiring a nuclear weapon. The Iranian government has long posed a constant menace to the peace and security of its neighbors and the entire world, which this council is charged to maintain. The Iranian government has repeatedly called for Israel's destruction and for, and I quote, death to America. They have launched direct and proxy attacks on Israeli civilians, including most recently on southern Israel's largest hospital, and just recently, in the last couple hours, on Haifa. Israel's government has also spread chaos, terror, and suffering throughout the region. Iran's government has also spread chaos, terror, and suffering throughout the region. Let us not forget that the Iranian government was an enabling and ideological material force behind Hamas's deadly assault on Israel in October 2023. And it twice attacked Israel last year with hundreds of ballistic missiles. The Iranian government also encouraged its terrorist proxy, Hezbollah, to open a northern front from Lebanon and enabled Houthi rebels in Yemen to become a menace to global trade and freedom of navigation, and to launch long-range missiles endangering civilians in Israel. In January 2024, a drone attack from an Iran-backed terrorist group on a U.S. military facility in Jordan killed 3 American service members. Enough is enough. President, as the leaders from the Group of 7 stated earlier this week, Iran is the principal source of instability and terror in the Middle East. The G7 also reaffirmed the right of Israel to defend itself. While the United States was not involved in Israel's strikes, let there be no doubt that the United States continues to stand with Israel and supports its actions against Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran's leaders could have avoided this conflict had they agreed to a deal that would have prevented them from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. But they refused to do so, choosing instead to delay and deny. We can no longer ignore that Iran has all that it needs to achieve a nuclear weapon. All it needs is a decision from their supreme leader. That is unacceptable, and this council must urge them to change course. The government of Iran has nothing to gain by escalating their rhetoric toward the IAEA, launching missiles at civilians, threatening neighbors, or pursuing nuclear weapons. For too long, they have prioritized terrorism and their nuclear program above the well-being of their own people. Their resulting weakness is now on full display for the entire world. The Iranian government must abandon its nuclear ambitions so that there is no more destruction. Choose instead prosperity for their people. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you, Madam President. We greet and thank the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, for his unambiguous message. During that message, he urged an opportunity to be given to peace. He said, give peace a chance. We also wish to extend our thanks to USG Rosemary DiCarlo, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi. We thank them both for their briefings. We also thank delegations here present that honor us with their presence. Today's meeting is a response to the international community's appeal to urge parties involved to adopt measures aimed at de-escalating the conflict. The conflict has picked up pace, and that is a source of great fear. We have witnessed the regrettable staging of attacks that have claimed civilian lives, including the lives of women, boys and girls. That has made the civilian population the primary victim of this conflict. The Security Council today, once again, has the duty to find mechanisms through multilateralism to craft a solution to this matter. It did just that successfully a decade ago with the implementation of Resolution 2231. In recent months, we have seen several rounds of negotiations take place. The goal of these negotiations was to find a diplomatic solution to Iran's nuclear program. As was indicated by the Secretary-General, diplomacy, negotiations and dialogue are the only ways to achieve solutions. Consequently, we urge all parties to heed that message from the Secretary-General and resume a genuine process of negotiation that will make it possible to move towards an agreement which is in accordance with the norms of international law. There are no perfect agreements or negotiations. They don't exist. Nevertheless, it is through serious, constructive dialogue and through commitment that significant progress can be made towards just and lasting solutions. Moreover, we reaffirm the mandate of the International Atomic Energy Agency as the competent technical body charged with verifying compliance with nuclear obligations. Madam President, we are witnessing a conflict in which it appears that the distinction between critical infrastructures and military targets has grown blurred. Consequently, we urgently and responsibly appeal to all parties to uphold international law and international humanitarian law. It is of pivotal importance to protect and look after the civilian population and to guarantee respect for critical infrastructure. With this in mind, we recall that nuclear facilities must not be attacked under any circumstances, particularly those that are already under monitoring and verification from the IAEA within the framework of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. We cannot allow acts of this kind to become acceptable within international law. The risks to the civilian population are too great because an incident of this kind could cause the release of radioactive material, and that would have grave consequences in terms of radiological contamination. That would be a risk to the people and the environment and would have an unprecedented regional impact. At this critical juncture, it is vital that this Council take resolute, coherent action, such as to ensure that its action creates credibility, which in turn guarantees an immediate cessation of hostilities and full respect for the principles of international law. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Panama for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank you for convening this emergency meeting of the Security Council on the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. We thank His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for his powerful reminder of this Council's responsibilities, as well as Mr. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the IAEA, and Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, Under Secretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, for their timely and insightful briefings. This request for this meeting underscores the gravity of the recent regrettable developments, coupled with the expectation that the Council, indeed its members, will enable the Council to discharge its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. We remain gravely alarmed by the ongoing military strikes by Israel against Iran, as well as the retaliatory strikes by Iran. These hostilities, which began on 13th June, have reportedly claimed the lives of senior Iranian officials, nuclear scientists, and civilians in both Israel and Iran, a toll we deeply find troubling. As we express grave concern regarding the attacks on Iran, we are equally disturbed by reports of strikes against or impacting civilian targets in Israel, including hospitals and emergency services, and in densely populated areas in clear violation of international humanitarian law. These hostilities have displaced families, damaged critical infrastructure, and disrupted essential services. Thousands face the urgent prospect of evacuation. Sierra Leone recalls the obligations of all parties under international humanitarian law, particularly the Fourth Geneva Convention, to protect civilians, medical personnel, and civilian objects at all times. We call for safe corridors for those seeking refuge, unimpeded humanitarian access, and close coordination with relief agencies to ensure the delivery of life-saving assistance. Swift humanitarian action is indispensable, yet it cannot substitute for political solution. The region needs restraint, responsibility, and credible diplomatic initiatives. Sierra Leone aligns itself with the Secretary General's appeal for the immediate de-escalation, renewed dialogue, and the exercise of maximum restraint. Statesmanship, not brinkmanship, is required. We are therefore heartened and fully welcome the meeting in Geneva today of the foreign ministers of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, including the EU High Representative and the Iranian Foreign Minister, as part of efforts to ease this conflict. We believe this is a window of opportunity that clearly exists for genuine dialogue and peace to prevail. We recall the binding obligations under international humanitarian law. Article 56 of Additional Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions prohibits attacks on works and installations containing dangerous forces, including nuclear, electrical generating stations, if such attacks may cause the release of dangerous forces resulting in civilian losses. The IAEA has also consistently underscored that the safety and security of nuclear facilities must never be compromised by military action. The ongoing hostilities risk triggering a disaster of unimaginable scale. Any military action that endangers nuclear facilities risks severe humanitarian consequences, irreversible environmental harm, and further regional instability with global repercussions. We therefore emphasize the need to safeguard and allow the full and unhindered implementation of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, which remains the cornerstone of the global nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful uses regime. The current conflict underscores the fragility of the international nuclear order and the urgent necessity to preserve the integrity of the NPT process. We call upon all states to recommit to the NPT's objectives and to engage constructively in dialogue within its framework. Our Council has a duty to ensure that tensions do not derail the NPT's vital role in advancing peace and security. We further urge support for regional initiatives, including a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, as envisaged in General Assembly and NPT review conference outcomes. We endorse inclusive diplomatic tracks aimed at restoring structured negotiations on Iran's nuclear program, the JCPOA, and addressing broader regional security concerns, including maritime safety and missile proliferation. Previous agreements, though imperfect, show that sustained engagement grounded in international law and mutual respect remains the surest path toward durable peace. We also support the impartial technical work of the IAEA. Full cooperation by all states, including Iran, with its monitoring and verification mandate is essential to ensure transparency, build confidence, and prevent miscalculation. We commend Director General Grossi for sustaining engagement under challenging circumstances. In closing, Madam President, Sierra Leone recalls the principle of sovereign equality under Article 2.1 of the Charter and the duty of member states to settle disputes by peaceful means under Article 33. We highlight Article 25, obliging states to accept and carry out Council's decisions, and Article 103, which establishes the supremacy of Charter obligations. The Council must speak with one voice in upholding the law and encouraging peaceful settlement. We welcome constructive efforts by regional actors and partners committed to the Charter. We encourage states with influence over the parties to use that influence and support non-military solutions, reinforce respect for international law. The human cost, environmental damage, and blow to economic stability from further escalation would be immense and long-lasting. Finally, Sierra Leone urges all parties to pause, de-escalate, and recommit to diplomacy. The eyes of the world are upon us, and history will measure us by the choices we make. Restraint, dialogue, and adherence to the Charter remain the guiding principles for a safer and more secure world. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of France.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, we have listened with utmost attention to the Secretary General, who forcefully reminded us of the gravity of the current situation, and for this we thank him. I thank the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Madam DiCarlo, as well as the Director General of the IAEA, Mr. Rafael Grossi, for their briefings, which provide us with an assessment of and provides with an overview of the justification for today's meeting. Israeli strikes against Iran have been ongoing for a week. Civilian casualties are multiplying on both sides. Yesterday, one of the largest Israeli hospitals was struck by an Iranian missile. Israeli strikes have also targeted civilian infrastructure that is unrelated to the Iranian nuclear and ballistic program, and information that has been relayed by the Director General of the IAEA vis-a-vis the radiological situation of certain sites is on everybody's minds. There is a need to urgently end these military operations. They harbor grave threats to regional peace and security. France calls for restraint and de-escalation. Civilian lives need to be shielded, and there's a need to re-embark upon the path of diplomacy. Mr. Secretary General stressed that at the heart of this matter lies the nuclear matter. France's position is clear. Iran cannot and must not develop or gain a nuclear weapon. Iran's gaining access to this weapon would generate a threat, first and foremost, for the security of Israel and the entire region, which Iran has been destabilizing for years by delivering its support to armed and terrorist groups. A nuclear Iran would also pose a direct threat to France's and Europe's security interests. This threat is now highly tangible. Hostages of the French state are presently being held in Iran, and Iran has been delivering ballistic missiles and Iranian drones to Russia, and they are being used in its war of aggression against Ukraine. France takes this opportunity to reiterate our call for the immediate release of the two hostages who have been held in Iran over 3 years under unacceptable conditions. Iran gaining access to a nuclear weapon would pose It would represent an egregious violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. This would result in a grave weakening of the international non-proliferation regime, of which the treaty is the cornerstone, and this would prompt other states to engage in an arms race in the region and beyond. And yet Iran has opted to engage in a dangerous escalation of its nuclear program, despite calls for it to respect its international commitments. Iran has accumulated a uranium stockpile that largely exceeds the limitations set under the 2015 agreement. It has generated highly enriched uranium at levels which have no justification, no credible civilian justification, and has established thousands of advanced centrifuges going beyond the limitations set out under the 2015 agreement, including sites where such activities are prohibited under the Iranian nuclear agreement and the JCPOA. The Director General of the IAEA, in a report published late May, stated that he is not in a position to guarantee the presence of the peaceful nature of the Iranian program. The Board of Governors of the IAEA observed in a resolution adopted on 12 June that Iran was failing to comply with obligations under the NPT. We are grateful to the IAEA for its unstinting efforts, shouldering its oversight and inspection activities despite Iran's obstruction. We respect the ethic of impartiality, independence, and rigorous respect for treaties and their mandate, which the IAEA once again has demonstrated. The goal of the Council needs to be for Iran to resume cooperation with the IAEA, to revert back to compliance with international obligations. A decision by Iran to withdraw from the NPT would be an unprecedented escalation. However, our responsibility vis-à-vis the suffering civilian populations, our commitment to international law, and the memory of the recent crisis in the Middle East require us to act. There can be no military solution to the Iranian nuclear matter. It is through negotiations that a lasting response needs to be sought to the threat of proliferation posed by Iran's nuclear program. This is France's steadfast position alongside our British and German partners. This is the approach which resulted in the adoption of the 2015 Vienna Agreement, whose implementation we have always supported despite the U.S.'s withdrawal in 2018 and despite the cessation of compliance by Iran in 2019. The Europeans of the E3 reverted in 2020 to the dispute settlement mechanism stipulated under the agreement and undertook tireless diplomatic efforts to that end. In 2021, 2022, Iran was proposed a revised agreement that would facilitate the return of the U.S. to the agreement, and Iran would see its full implementation. Iran did not take these opportunities. This year, France, alongside E3 partners, has continuously liaised with Iran, and we hope that these exchanges will bear fruit. In the absence of agreement that reflects our security interests, France, alongside European partners of the E3, as was announced, will shoulder responsibility through the provisions set out under Resolution 2231 of the Security Council. France solemnly calls upon Iran to finally take the chance, the opportunity of a negotiated diplomatic solution. There is still time. Today in Geneva, a meeting of the E3 ministers, of the High Representative of the EU and the Iranian counterpart is being held to that end. As time is ticking, France, together with close European partners, stands ready to immediately initiate diplomatic negotiations with Iran to ensure that Iran will never gain access to the nuclear weapon. And to end this conflict, there's a need to reach agreement on a robust, verifiable, sustained agreement, which is critical to ensure the purely peaceful nature of the Iranian nuclear program. Clear and concrete and tangible commitments need to be shouldered now by Iran to demonstrate to the international community that Tehran hopes to engage upon this path and for rapid results to be achieved. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I start by thanking the Secretary General, Under Secretary General De Carlo, and Director General Grossi for your clear and sober briefings. The UK reiterates its full support for the vital work of the IAEA. We thank the IAEA Director General and his staff for their continued professionalism, diligence, and courage in these complex circumstances. President, first, the United Kingdom is deeply concerned by the sharp escalation we've witnessed between Israel and Iran over the past week. This is a dangerous moment for the entire region, and further escalation is in no one's interest. Civilians must never be targeted, and we deplore the loss of civilian life and offer our condolences. All parties must protect civilians and civilian infrastructure in line with international humanitarian law. Restraint is vital to protect further regional escalation and loss of life. The United Kingdom supports Israel's need to protect its security and people. However, a return to diplomacy is urgent, and we have pressed this with both Israel and Iran. I also want to be clear that the UK did not participate and is not participating in Israel's strikes. We have deployed assets, including jets, to the region as a defensive and precautionary measure only. President, second, Iran's nuclear program is a significant concern. My Prime Minister has been clear, Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. The IAEA's reports show that Iran's high-enriched uranium stockpile has grown to alarming levels. Iran's stockpile of 60% high-enriched uranium has no credible civilian justification. It is essential that Iran cooperate with the IAEA and bridge the trust gap that the Secretary-General spoke of. The IAEA and the Non-Proliferation Treaty are key pillars of international security. For many years, the UK, alongside our E3 partners, has sought a diplomatic solution to Iran's nuclear program. This commitment stands and has never been more urgent. Alongside E3 colleagues and the EU, we are engaging with Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi in Geneva today and using this window of opportunity to support a return to diplomacy and a peaceful resolution. Any further escalation, such as restricting IAEA access, diverting nuclear material, or increasing the production of high-enriched uranium, would intensify the threat to international peace and security posed by Iran's nuclear program. Third, military action cannot put an end to Iran's nuclear capabilities. We have strongly supported and continue to support diplomatic efforts to come to a deal. That is the only way to resolve the nuclear issue for the long term. President, our objective remains stability in the Middle East. A diplomatic solution is in the interests of all concerned. Even now, it is not out of reach. Now is the time for restraint, calm, and a return to diplomacy and dialogue. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Madam President. Secretary General, thank you very much for your introductory remarks. USG De Carlo and DG Grossi, thank you very much for your updates and appraisal of the situation on the ground. Madam President, as we heard from the briefers, the situation continues to deteriorate rapidly and risks pushing the region toward the point of no return. We are deeply concerned with the Israeli strikes on Iran, as well as with Iran's retaliatory strikes on Israel. Slovenia condemns its military escalation and the unnecessary loss of civilian lives. We call on both sides to respect the UN Charter and international law, including international humanitarian law. We echo the Secretary General's urgent appeal to avoid the internationalization of the conflict. Slovenia calls on both sides to immediately de-escalate and agree to full and unconditional ceasefire. Madam President, Slovenia remains concerned about the size and unclear nature of Iran's nuclear program. These concerns are aggravated by the fact that the International Atomic Energy Agency, after many years, still cannot confirm or deny the exclusively peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program. However, no amount of precision strikes will make these concerns go away. We have no tolerance for proliferation of nuclear weapons, either for attacks against civilian nuclear infrastructure, whether it happens in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, or anywhere else. Madam President, issues pertaining to Iran's nuclear program have always required a tailored diplomatic solution. JCPOA was a necessity, and when it expires, it will need to be replaced. With this in mind, we urge all parties to prioritize diplomacy and remain committed to a political process. We welcome the talks between the E3 and Iran taking place today in Geneva. These represent a much-needed stabilizing factor. To conclude, Madam President, the death and destruction in both Israel and Iran in recent days are raising the stakes, escalating the fighting and inflaming rhetoric in a region that has already endured more than its share of suffering. Our thoughts remain with civilians under siege in Gaza and the hostages who need to be released immediately and unconditionally. In such a volatile situation, it takes courage to de-escalate and commit to peace. I appeal to both sides to show that courage, to spare their own civilians and the Middle East as a whole from further bloodshed and destruction. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by thanking the Secretary General for his very important remarks. I also like to thank Under Secretary General Mr. Carlo and Director General Mr. Grossi for the informative and timely briefings. Madam President, since last Friday's emergency meeting, there has been a significant deterioration of the situation in the Middle East. Once a dreaded possibility, military escalation is now a reality. In this dangerous moment, allow me to make the following 3 points. First, we reiterate our call for immediate de-escalation and utmost restraint so as to end the vicious cycle of military action and violence. The international community must be urgently engaged in order to provide the necessary security assurances and a sustainable diplomatic endgame so as to avoid a regional or, worse still, a global conflagration. We fully support the Secretary General's appeal to all to avoid any further widening of the conflict, and we stress our commitment to regional security and stability, as well as support to any diplomatic initiative that will lead to a sustainable ceasefire. Second, Greece has repeatedly expressed, and does so again, its strong concern over the Iranian nuclear program. It is imperative to preserve the global non-proliferation regime as enshrined in the NPT, and Iran must comply with its legally binding safeguard obligations and can never be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon. Third and last, Greece has consistently supported Israel's right to protect itself. We also echo the Secretary General's condemnation of the tragic and unnecessary loss of lives and injuries to civilians and damage to homes and critical civilian infrastructure. A week into yet another conflict, it's now more important than ever to ensure that civilians do not keep finding themselves in the crossfire, especially given the nuclear aspect of the evolving crisis. We recall the obligation of UN member states to act in accordance with the Charter and international law. We consider of absolute priority the respect of international law and international humanitarian law. It is essential to uphold the UN Charter as regards the use of force, as well as the integrity of the global non-proliferation regime. Madam President, in closing, allow me to reiterate that de-escalation and a full and immediate ceasefire are now urgently needed as a first step towards a sustainable peace. The international community and countries with influence must step in and offer a diplomatic way out to both parties. We are looking forward to a positive outcome of the meeting taking place today in Geneva between the foreign ministers of the E3, United Kingdom, France, Germany, the High Representative of the European Union, and the Foreign Minister of Iran. The stakes are simply too high for regional world security and failure is not an option. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Somalia.
Madam President, thank you for your timely leadership in convening this meeting. We appreciate the remarks of the Secretary General and briefings provided by USG De Carlo and Director General Grossi on the rapidly evolving situation in the Middle East. The situation arising from reported Israeli airstrikes against the Islamic Republic of Iran on 13 June 2025 and Iran's subsequent response is a matter of great concern. These actions represent a perilous escalation that threatens to engulf the entire region in an uncontrollable cycle of violence, suffering, and pain. We strongly condemn any acts of aggression that violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of member states. Such actions are in clear contravention of the fundamental principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, particularly Article 2 and Paragraph 4, which unequivocally prohibit the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. We believe that all member states share a responsibility to act in accordance with these commitments. We emphasize the necessity of respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, adhering to the principles of good neighborliness and settling disputes through peaceful means. Madam President, Somalia urges all parties to work towards de-escalation, to achieve a comprehensive ceasefire, and to restore calm and hope. Our delegation expresses deep concern about this dangerous escalation, which threatens grave consequences for regional peace and stability. The spillover of these hostilities imperil countless lives and threaten to deepen existing crises. Somalia strongly reaffirms the urgent necessity of establishing a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, applicable to all states in the region without exception, in accordance with relevant international resolutions. We also stress the need for all Middle Eastern countries to join the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as a step towards regional and global security. We emphasize the paramount importance of protecting civilians and civilian infrastructure, as well as refraining from targeting nuclear facilities that are under International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards in line with Security Council resolutions or decisions. Such acts constitute a violation of international law and international humanitarian law, including the 1949 Geneva Convention, and pose unacceptable risks to civilian populations and the environment. At this critical stage, Somalia calls for a swift return to the path of negotiations as the only viable means to reach a sustainable agreement regarding the Iranian nuclear program. We further emphasize the importance of safeguarding the freedom of navigation in international waters in accordance with international law, and urge all parties to refrain from actions that undermine maritime security. Madam President, the complex challenges before us demand a collective and measured response grounded in dialogue, mutual respect, and the search for the common ground. Our delegation reaffirms its commitment to multilateralism and the principles of the United Nations Charter. We urge all parties to act with responsibility and wisdom, placing the well-being of the region's peoples above all other considerations. It's important to seize this moment to redouble our efforts for de-escalation and to support a diplomatic process that can deliver peace, stability, security for all states in the Middle East. Finally, my delegation stands ready to engage constructively with the international community to advance these shared goals. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. And I also thank the Secretary General for his important introductory remarks, and Under-Secretary General de-Carlo and Director General Grossi for their detailed briefings and urgent messages here this morning. Madam President, as underlined by the Secretary General, the recent escalation in the Middle East has once again brought the region dangerously close to the brink of a region-wide conflict. The repeated attacks between Israel and Iran are cause for great concern and pose a grave risk to international peace and security. We must do our utmost, individually and collectively, to respond to this threat and to prevent further destabilization. Together with the European Union and many others, we join the call for maximum restraint and immediate de-escalation. We urge all parties to abide by their obligations under the UN Charter and international law and to ensure the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure in line with international humanitarian law. We deplore the loss of civilian lives and unacceptable attacks on civilian targets, including the recent hospital attack. Furthermore, all actions should be taken and the necessary restraint shown to reduce the risk of nuclear accidents. Denmark's view is clear. Diplomatic engagement and a negotiated solution, with the IAEA playing a vital role, remain the only viable paths toward lasting peace in the region. Denmark supports all diplomatic efforts to restore stability and return to the negotiating table to seek a solution to the Iranian nuclear issue. And we welcome the E3 foreign ministers and the EU's meeting with the foreign minister of Iran in Geneva today. Madam President, we have been clear that Iran must never be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon. Denmark has repeatedly expressed our concern about Iran's escalating nuclear trajectory. The fact that the IAEA is unable to provide assurances that the Iranian nuclear program is exclusively peaceful is deeply disturbing. We are further alarmed that Iran is non-compliant with the legally binding nuclear safeguards obligations as recently determined by the IAEA Board of Governors. There is no plausible civilian reason for Iran's production and stockpiling of highly enriched uranium. We strongly urge Iran to cooperate with the IAEA on the outstanding safeguard issues and to return to the negotiating table to secure an agreement with the international community which ensures that Iran's nuclear activities are exclusively peaceful, an agreement which upholds the global non-proliferation norms and which fosters lasting stability in the Middle East and beyond. Madam President, in closing, let me reaffirm Denmark's urgent call for de-escalation, for all sides to refrain from steps that could lead to serious regional consequences. In the face of mounting civilian suffering and at the risk of a spark that ignites a wider conflict, this is imperative. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as representative of Guyana. I thank you, Secretary General, for your remarks and for your untiring efforts at peace. I also thank Under Secretary General Di Carlo and Director General Grossi for the very important updates provided. Colleagues, the recent escalation between Israel and Iran poses an immediate threat to the security and stability of an already volatile region. The effects of this conflict could extend far beyond its immediate borders, exacerbated by the non-compliance with international law. Sadly, regional and international peace and security are now both under threat. Guyana took note of Israel's letter of 17th of June 2025, in which the Council was informed of Operation Rising Lion, aimed at, and I quote, neutralizing the existential and imminent threat from Iran's nuclear weapon and ballistic missile programs, end of quote. We also took note of Iran's letter of 18th June 2025, in which it, and I quote, reserves its right to self-defense, to protect its sovereignty, territorial integrity, the Iranian people, and its vital national interests, end of quote. While acknowledging these letters, we urge both Iran and Israel to exercise maximum restraint to avoid plummeting the region into deeper crisis and dangerously close to a nuclear catastrophe. We also urge both parties to adhere to their obligations under international law, the UN Charter, and the relevant Security Council resolutions. We emphasize that a state's right to self-defense does not absolve them of their responsibilities and obligations under international law, including human rights and humanitarian law. Colleagues, the Middle East has long endured a fragile stability, constantly threatened by geopolitical tensions and unresolved conflicts. As the war in Gaza continues, this new escalation threatens to shatter the delicate balance, igniting a wider regional conflagration with unimaginable consequences. It risks drawing in more actors, further entrenching cycles of violence, and making a peaceful resolution increasingly elusive. Like the Secretary General, Guyana firmly believes that dialogue, diplomacy, and adherence to international law are the only pathways to sustainable peace in the region. We call on all parties to immediately cease hostilities, de-escalate tensions, and return to the path of diplomacy. The root causes of this escalation must be addressed with urgency, and the parties must work towards a comprehensive and lasting political solution that respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states in the region. Colleagues, Guyana is also concerned about the possible humanitarian consequences and reiterates its call for all parties to respect international humanitarian law, particularly the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution, and to ensure the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. Media reports indicate that over 200 persons have already been killed in Iran and at least 24 in Israel as a result of the escalation. It is important to ensure that more civilian lives are not lost. Finally, Guyana takes positive note of the meeting in Geneva today with the E3, UK, France, Germany, the EU, and Iran. We also reaffirm our commitment to supporting any Security Council measure aimed at preserving international peace and security. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Security Council, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, we express our sincere appreciation to you, Madam President, for convening this urgent meeting at our request. We welcome the presence of the Secretary General and in this meeting, and thanks for his introductory remarks. We also extend our gratitude to Under Secretary General Ms. Di Carlo for her valuable briefing. We thank Algeria, Pakistan, China, and the Russian Federation for supporting this meeting and for their clear condemnation of Israeli brutal attacks. Madam President, on 13 June, Israel launched a large-scale, unprovoked military attack against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Civilian cities, including Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, Tabriz, and Kermanshah, were deliberately targeted. The strikes were planned and systematic, killing senior military officials, scientists, professors, students, doctors, artists, athletes, rescuers, and ordinary civilians, including women, children, and infants. Many died in their sleep. These children killed in their bed. Hundreds of civilians have been killed and thousands injured. The aggression continues. On 16 June, Israel attacked Hakim Children's Hospital in Tehran, Farabi Rehabilitation Hospital in Kermanshah, and Iranian Red Crescent Society building and medical ambulances. These are only a few instances of the brutality and gross violation of international humanitarian law by Israeli regime. At least 2 pregnant women and their unborn children were killed. On the same day, Israel struck the national broadcasters IRIB during a live broadcast, killing journalists and humanitarian workers. Just today, Israeli regime inflicted damage to 2 other hospitals in Iran, endangering the lives of patients and medical personnel. Up till now, 5 hospitals have suffered from heinous attack of Israeli regime, along with physicians and humanitarian personnel who have been killed or injured. There were not accidents, there were not collateral damage, they were deliberated war crimes, acts of a state terror, and example of barbaric warfare. Madam President, Excellencies, and colleagues, Israel also attacked Iran's peaceful safeguard nuclear site and facilities. On 13 June, it struck the uranium conversion facility and the fuel plate fabrication plant. On 18 June, it targeted centrifuge production sites in Tehran and Karaj, both under IAEA monitoring. On the 19th June, it attacked the Arak heavy water reactor built under the JCPOA terms and IAEA safeguard with no proliferation risk. These attacks violate the UN Charter, international law, the IAEA Statute, and Security Council Resolution 2231 and 487. Israeli strikes are an assault on the global non-proliferation regime. Security Council Resolution 487, which was adopted unanimously, clearly states that any military attack on the safeguard nuclear facilities is an attack on the entire IAEA safeguard system and the NPT itself. The Security Council must implement its resolution. If the Council fails to act now, it will send a message that international law and resolution apply selectively. If the non-proliferation regime collapses, this Council will share responsibility with the Israeli regime. Madam President, despite Iran's repeated warning about the threats of our peaceful nuclear sites and facilities, the IAEA Director General has failed to act. His silence undermines the agency authority, neutrality, and credibility. The IAEA cannot remain silent while safeguard facilities are attacked. This inaction must end. Israel openly declared that it will continue this strike for as many days as it takes. We are alarmed by credible report that the United States, as a depository of NPT, may be joining this war. Any such support violates the NPT and undermines global security. The selective invocation of international law by US, France, using it when convenient, discarding it when it constrains their allies, is a form of institutional hypocrisy that gravely undermines the credibility of this Council and the international law. Let me be clear, Iran's nuclear program is peaceful and under the world's most extensive IAEA inspections. Iran has long advocated for a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. Israel is the only possessor of undeclared nuclear weapon in the region. It refused to accede to the NPT and blocked regional disarmament efforts. Madam President, Israeli aggression violates the UN Charter. It breached the basic principle of prohibition of the use of force. It violates Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It violates international human rights law and targets innocent civilians and threatens the right of life and security of our people. This regime committed war crimes, crimes against humanity and state terrorism. It attacks on safeguard nuclear facilities, set a dangerous precedent for global security. Madam President, the already dire situation has been exacerbated by mounting and irrefutable evidence of direct involvement by the United States in this illegal war of aggression. The US has publicly threatened to strike Iran's safeguard nuclear facilities. Such acts constitute a flagrant violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter and a breach of the sovereign equality of states. These reckless statements and actions emanate from the head of a state who is a permanent member of this Council and entrusted with primary responsibility for international peace and security, and an irresponsible behavior. Madam President, Iran has exercised its inherent right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Our response has complied fully with international law, including humanitarian law. We have taken all necessary precautions to protect civilians. Iran will continue to exercise this right as long as the Security Council fails to discharge its primary responsibility under the Charter and until the Israeli aggression is fully and unequivocally terminated. The Security Council must act now. We reiterate our call on the Security Council to determine the Israeli illegal use of force and armed attacks against Iran are a breach of peace and act of aggression. Adopt binding and enforcement measures under Chapter 7 to halt the aggression and prevent its recurrence. Condemn clearly the violation of Iran's sovereignty and targeting of our safeguard nuclear facilities. Address the risk of wider regional war, especially the unlawful involvement of a third country. Madam President, the lies and fabrication used by representatives of Israeli regime and its Western allies don't work anymore to whitewash and justify its horrendous crimes. International law is clear. There is no right for Israel to commit this act of aggression, no right to attack and target civilian infrastructure or safeguard nuclear facilities, no legal or moral cover for war crimes. The so-called preemptive attack and existential threat claims used by this terrorist regime and its allies to justify aggression have no basis in international law, and to conduct acts of aggression, kill innocent people, and violate the territorial integrity of states. These are false excuses for Israeli aggression. Iran has never initiated any war, while Israel, as an occupying and terrorist regime, has a long and dark history of illegal use of force, violation of all legal international norms, assassination, and nuclear secrecy that destabilize the entire region. The selective use of international law by certain members of this Council expose dangerous double standards that endanger international peace and security and undermine the credibility of this body. Without the support and protection of certain Western states, especially the United States, Israel could not have been able to commit this aggression with such impunity. This complicity must be recorded by history. Finally, Madam President, Council's failure to act at this critical juncture would constitute a profound abdication of the Council's responsibilities and a grave betrayal of fundamental principles of the United Nations. Inaction will embolden the aggressor, undermine international law, and send a message of dangerous impunity to the world. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Israel.
Madam President, I would like to thank the Secretary General, USG De Carlo, and Director General Grossi for your remarks. Madam President, before I begin my remarks, I must address the representative of the Islamic regime in Iran, Mr. Iravani. How dare you? How dare you write 5 letters in the last week, come before this Council, demand a session, and ask the international community for sympathy? How dare you ask the international community to protect you from the consequences of your own genocidal agenda? Have you no shame? For years, your supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has publicly and repeatedly called for the destruction of Israel and the United States. In May 2024, he declared, and I quote, "The divine promise to eliminate the Zionist entity will be fulfilled." In May 2025, he said, and I quote, "The Zionist regime that is a lethal, dangerous, cancerous tumor should certainly be eradicated, and it will be." These statements are your regime's policies. Your government has attempted the assassination of Prime Minister Netanyahu. It attempted the assassination of President Trump. Your operatives have plotted to attack Jewish communities and kill Israeli civilians across the world. Now, with innocent blood still dripping from your hands, you come here asking for sympathy. You demand protection from this Council while plotting the extermination of my people. It's enough. Enough with the performances. Enough with the theater. How can this Council allow the representative of a regime that funds, arms, and orchestrates terror across the world to come here and play victim? It's like a wolf complaining when the shepherd fights back to protect his flock. So innocent. Mr. Iravani, please clarify to us. Do you support the destruction of Israel, a UN member state? Do you support the assassination of our elected leaders? If you do not, say so. We are all here, waiting. This Council should put an end to this charade, once and for all. Mr. Iravani, you are not a victim. You are not even a diplomat. You are a wolf pretending to be a diplomat. And we are done pretending otherwise. Madam President, on Wednesday night, Iran launched a ballistic missile directly at a hospital. And by the way, I listened to your word. You mentioned that we attacked hospitals. I ask you to provide a list of the hospitals that Israel attacked in Iran. We know what we are doing. If we attacked hospitals, show us the locations, show us the names and the list. Iran launched a ballistic missile directly at a hospital, Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, the largest hospital in southern Israel. It was struck by a precision-guided missile fired by the Islamic Republic of Iran. This hospital serves over 1 million people, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze, Bedouin. It is a vital provider of emergency and trauma care. Iran hit it in purpose. There was no military bases around, no mistakes, leaving those million people with severely reduced access to medical service. This was not a misfire. This was not a mistake. Iran has proven its ability to strike strategic targets with accuracy. This was a deliberate act. It is a blatant violation of international law, a war crime, and a calculated attempt to murder the most vulnerable. Let this Council understand what that missile really signified, that no one is safe, that if Iran will target a hospital with a ballistic missile, it will target anyone, anywhere, with anything they have. Today it was Beersheba. Tomorrow it could be Brussels. Soon it could be Boston. Iran is rapidly expanding its ballistic missile arsenal. Today its longest range missiles can travel over 2,000 kilometers. That already puts Eastern Europe in range. But Iran is not stopping there. Iran is developing missiles with a range of over 4,000 kilometers. That would place every European capital, London, Paris, Berlin, Rome, within striking distance. And when that milestone reaches, what comes next? New York, Washington, the US entire East Coast. Before Israel took action, that reality was approaching faster than you could imagine. Council members, do you believe that such a regime will hesitate to threaten entire populations with nuclear-armed missiles? Can you guarantee? Especially a regime which chants death to America, death to England, death to Israel, and so many others. Because that is where the world was heading. Israel is stopping it. Iran has already enriched uranium to near weapons-grade levels. It cannot be denied. We saw the reports. It has built deep underground facilities designed to survive bunker-busting bombs. It has advanced missile delivery systems. And it has lied to the IAEA and the world at every step. There must finally be an acknowledgement that there is no greater threat to international peace and security than a nuclear Iran. The Soroka strike of our hospital should end any illusion that this threat is theoretical. Iran is not just building the capability, it is using it. We will never allow those capabilities to go nuclear. While the Ayatollah shout death to America and death to Israel, many on this council dismiss those threats. While Iranian missiles fly, the UN urges restraint and de-escalation while ignoring Iran's nuclear ambitions altogether. That weakness, that detachment from reality, that hypocrisy is what allowed Iran to get as far in its nuclear program as it did. It is what allowed Iran to sow chaos across the world. And let's analyze it for a minute. The Iranian regime has exported thousands of drones which have killed many civilians. It has harmed Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, Shiite militias in Iraq, extremist groups in Syria and Africa, and criminal networks in Latin America and Europe. It's a war machine, stretched all around the world. Its reach is not limited by borders, its hatred is not limited by reason, and its ambition is not limited by geography. We have already seen the consequences. Terror attacks in Argentina, Iranian agents uncovered in European capitals, proxy missile strikes on Gulf states. This is Iran's vision for the world, and it's happening in real time. Right now, Israel is the focus point for that murderous vision. Just yesterday, Iran launched another ballistic missile, this time carrying cluster munitions at a densely populated civilian area in central Israel. Cluster munitions are designed to spread multiple explosions over a wide area. It deliberately fired these munitions at civilians. Iran's intentions could not be clearer. Bloody murder. 29 civilians have been killed and almost 900 wounded by Iranian missiles. The only reason the number isn't higher is because of Israel's advanced defensive capabilities. So yes, Israel acted because we understand the cost of waiting. We will not wait for another threat, whether that is rockets, missiles, terrorists, or an atomic bomb. Israel acted as a last resort. This was the final window of opportunity to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, and it came only after diplomacy had been exhausted. Israel cannot and will not accept this situation. Operation Rising Lion was launched to neutralize an imminent and existential threat, and we are doing so in full compliance with international law. Israel is strictly following the law of armed conflict, including the rules of distinction, proportionality, and precautions in attacks. That's why I'm waiting for the report about the hospitals. Our strikes are aimed at military objectives based on reliable intelligence. Every measure is taken to minimize harm to civilians. Iran launches indiscriminate barbaric missile attacks. They deliberately target population centers. This is the difference between a democracy acting in defense of its people and a brutal regime targeting civilians. Colleagues, it is Israeli civilians running for shelter now, every day. But something many of you also seem not to understand is that when Israel acts, we are not only defending our people, we are defending yours. As German Chancellor Merz said, and I quote, Israel is doing the world's dirty work. We are the first target, but we will not be the last. We are holding the line between civilization and genocidal jihadist imperialism. Iran doesn't just want to destroy Israel. It wants to remake the world order. One missile, one terror proxy, one destroyed hospital at a time. So no, we do not apologize for defending ourselves. We do not apologize for striking Iran's nuclear facilities. We do not apologize for neutralizing the threat, because while some here raise their voices when Israel strikes a ballistic missile site, they fall silent when Iran strikes a surgical wind. Some condemn us for destroying a drone factory, but say nothing when Iran hits a residential building. That is not balance. That is moral collapse. We are doing what this Council should have done long ago. We are acting where the international community hesitated. We are stopping a threat that endangered the entire world. Though our homes, our families, and our children are under threat, we will not stop. Not until Iran's nuclear threat is dismantled. Not until its war machine is disarmed. Not until our people and yours are safe. This is not just Israel's fight. It is the world's fight, and if no one else will fight it, we will. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement. I wish to take this opportunity to remind all speakers that this is a formal meeting of the Council, and as such, the need to ensure the proper decorum and proper language, we should always aim to refrain from personal attacks. I now give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
شكرا جزيلا السيدة الرئيس ونعرف.
Thank you, Madam President. We express our appreciation for the presence of the Secretary General and for calling to contain this crisis and his call for return to renegotiations and his awareness of its consequences. We also extend our thanks to the Under Secretary General and the Director General of the IAEA for their briefings. I would like to express the appreciation of the Republic of Iraq for the efforts of the Security Council in following the dangerous developments in the Middle East, which is witnessing an unprecedented escalation owing to the continued Israeli attacks on the Islamic Republic of Iran and their repercussions on regional and international security. Iraq strongly condemns the unjustified Israeli attacks against the Islamic Republic of Iran and the repeated Israeli violations of the sovereignty of states, especially the violations of the Iraqi airspace to launch an aggression against neighboring Iran. These actions constitute a blatant violation of the principles of the UN Charter and international law, and a flagrant assault and unlawful use of the airspace of a sovereign state to carry out hostilities against another neighboring UN member state. These actions have exacerbated instability in the region and exposed its security to serious risks. As a result, Iraq was forced to take the precautionary decision to close its airspace, which caused economic losses in the transportation and tourism sectors, in addition to humanitarian damages due to the stranded travelers and airport closures. We reaffirm our categorical rejection of any violation of Iraqi sovereignty. We call for an immediate end to these unacceptable breaches. We will not allow Iraq to become a battleground for settling regional or international scores. In this context, the government of the Republic of Iraq has submitted an official complaint to the Presidency of the Security Council on the 13th of June, outlining the details of this violation. Madam President, shortly before the convening of this session, 50 Israeli warplanes have violated our airspaces and our territorial integrity. They were coming from the Syrian-Jordanian borders. 20 airplanes started, followed by 30 airplanes heading to the south of Iraq, and they flew over Al-Basra, Najaf, and Karbala cities. These violations are violations of international law and the UN Charter. They violate the sovereignty of Iraq. They also constitute a threat to the sacred sites and regions, which might cause strong popular reactions considering the importance of these holy sites for our peoples. Madam President, Iraq has repeatedly warned since the beginning of the war on the Gaza Strip. It has repeatedly warned of the consequences of the continuation of this war and the expansion of the conflict, which fuels regional tensions and endangers regional and international peace and security. No measures have been taken so far to stop this war or to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people. This has emboldened the Israeli occupation forces to commit more crimes and attempt to expand the war and escalated, dragging the region into a regional conflict. This is what we had warned against. We reaffirm today that the continued Israeli aggression against the Republic of Iran threatens to turn the region into a full-scale conflict zone with catastrophic consequences for the peoples of the region, for international waterways, their closure, and the impact this might have on energy markets and the global economy. The continuation and geographical expansion of the war or the involvement of new actors in this war all threaten to turn it into a comprehensive regional conflict that jeopardizes the stability of the entire region and will have dire consequences for all the peoples of the region, including countries that were not part of the direct conflict. The situation becomes even more serious since this is not the first time the Security Council convenes to discuss military actions
carried out by the Israeli entity against sovereign states and their nuclear facilities. We all clearly remember the Council's resolution 487 of 1981 and the report of the Board of Governors of the IAEA, which then described the Israeli action as a blow to the comprehensive safeguards system of the IAEA and to the non-proliferation regime, adding that Israel should subject its nuclear facilities to the safeguards regime and to accede to the NPT in order to create a zone free from nuclear weapons and all weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. The current violations also coincide with ongoing diplomatic negotiation tracks. The current military escalation deals a severe blow to all political efforts and returns the region to the brink of confrontation at a time when we are all in dire need of promoting dialogue and reason. We encourage the IAEA to fulfill its technical mandate. Madam President, Iraq, in its capacity as president of the Arab League Summit, continues its regional and international diplomatic efforts. It has called for an emergency meeting of Arab foreign ministers to coordinate positions. We are also working closely with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to unify visions and stances to defuse this serious crisis and contain it to save lives and ensure the region does not slide into a devastating full-scale war. We must also avoid the consequences arising from the repeated targeting of nuclear facilities, which could lead to catastrophic radioactive leaks that go beyond the borders of the targeted state and pose a long-term direct threat to human life and the environment in neighboring countries, including Iraq. In conclusion, Madam President, Iraq calls on the Security Council to shoulder its responsibilities in maintaining peace and security and doing the following. 1. Take urgent action to demand an immediate ceasefire and prevent any further escalation, sparing the region more destruction and instability. 2. Condemn airspace violations and breaches of sovereignty, especially those affecting Iraq and neighboring countries. 3. Support the diplomatic path to end the crisis and avoid any actions that worsen the situation, to return to the negotiating table and activate international mediation mechanisms. 4th, to protect nuclear facilities and civilian infrastructure and warn against their use in conflicts. And 5th, to prevent any escalation that could disrupt international maritime navigation, air transport, and energy supply lines to avoid a global energy crisis. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Iraq for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Kuwait.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Madam President, Excellencies, allow me at the outset to welcome the Secretary General and UN officials for taking part in this meeting. I am speaking at the Council again today on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council member states to stress the firm and clear position of our states, namely the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the State of Qatar, the Sultanate of Oman, and my country, the State of Kuwait, regarding the dangerous developments in our region. Madam President, our group renews its condemnation of the Israeli attacks on the Islamic Republic of Iran and its nuclear facilities. We stress that these attacks have dangerous repercussions on the security and stability of our region. They are a blatant violation of the principles of international law and the UN Charter, and they thwart international efforts to achieve peace and de-escalation. We continue to intensify our diplomatic efforts at the highest levels to stop and avert any escalation, because we believe that diplomacy and dialogue are the only choice and alternative to confrontation and escalation. As we follow the dangerous developments in the region, we stress that a continued deterioration could lead to catastrophic consequences and fuel tensions, which could impede the prospects of a diplomatic solution and peace. In light of this sensitive and delicate situation, which requires us all to stay alert and act with wisdom, we call for the highest levels of restraint and ending hostilities immediately to prevent an expansion of the conflict and return to dialogue and negotiations, because this is the best and only way to overcome the current crisis, ensure sustainable international and regional security and peace. We also call upon the Security Council and the international community to shoulder their responsibilities and ensure an immediate end to this war, to prevent any escalation and push towards the continuation of U.S.-Iranian negotiations on the Iranian nuclear dossier facilitated by the Sultanate of Oman. Madam President, we reaffirm the need to respect the sovereignty of states and abide by the basic principles and norms of the UN Charter and international law, as well as the principles of good neighborliness and non-interference in internal affairs. It is also important to refrain from the use or threat of use of force. We stress the important role of the IAEA in promoting preventive security and preventing the targeting of nuclear facilities, because this poses grave humanitarian and environmental risks and is a threat to the safety and comprehensive safeguards regime. It also violates all international and humanitarian laws. In this vein, we stress the need to protect maritime security and maritime corridors in the region and address activities that threaten the security and stability of the region and the world, including the targeting of commercial ships and threatening shipping lanes and international trade, as well as oil facilities in the GCC countries. In conclusion, we urge the international community and the Security Council specifically to take swift and effective action to contain this crisis and support diplomatic dialogue in order to protect the safety and security of the peoples of the region and prevent further escalation. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Kuwait for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Señora Presidenta.
Madam Chair, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has the honor to take the floor on behalf of the group of friends in defense of the United Nations Charter. We are cognizant of the crucial mandate entrusted to this organ pursuant to the Charter of the United Nations. At the same time, we reiterate our unwavering solidarity with the people and government of the Islamic Republic of Iran in these difficult times. Madam President, in response to the heinous attack perpetrated by Israel against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which was initiated on the 13th of June 2025, the member states of the Group of Friends in Defense of the United Nations Charter issued a special communiqué on the 14th of June 2025. That communiqué saw them express their unequivocal condemnation and the most fervent possible repudiation of large-scale attacks that today continue to be perpetrated against many sites in Iran. These have produced the deaths of hundreds of civilians, including women, girls, boys, Iranian scientists, university professors, and senior military officials. Some of them were targeted alongside members of their families while they were at home. The member states of the Group of Friends in Defense of the UN Charter fervently condemn Israel's deliberate attacks against civilians and areas populated by civilians in which millions of people reside. We underscore that persistent, systematic and widespread attacks as conducted against women, girls and boys, the infliction of grave bodily harm and military attacks against residential areas, civilian objects and property by Israel throughout the region, including their recent attacks against the Islamic Republic of Iran, lay bare once again Israel's absolute disregard for any law or norm and the premeditated nature of these brutal crimes. Moreover, we condemn the deliberate attacks against senior officials and Iranian scientists. Moreover, we denounce Israel's attacks against the Natanz nuclear facility, one of the Iranian sites which operates under the safeguards and full oversight of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Against this backdrop, we member states express our grave concern at the fact that these brutal attacks and the damage resulting therefrom pose considerable risks regarding the release of radioactive material. That is a grave threat to the civilian population and the environment. At the same time, we express our concern at the fact that Israeli attacks continue to imperil civil aviation security in the region. Madam President, the Group of Friends in Defense of the United Nations Charter underscores that these reprehensible attacks constitute a flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter, as well as of the fundamental principles of international law. These include sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the prohibition of the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity of states. These attacks also run counter to international human rights law and gravely violate fundamental rights, including the right to life and the right to health. What's more, these atrocious attacks constitute a flagrant violation of Article 2.4 of the United Nations Charter, inter alia. Against this backdrop, we warn against the acquiescence and neglect of the United Nations and the international community in terms of failing to deal with the persistent brutal attacks of Israel in the region. We recall that a lack of action and a lack of measures against such grave violations on Israel's part will erode the rule of law internationally and will undermine the credibility of the multilateral system. At the same time, such inaction would normalize the perpetration of new atrocity crimes. That is something which is undoubtedly clearly unacceptable. We underscore that such flagrant violations of the United Nations Charter and the continued brutal attacks waged by Israel which constitute threats to regional and international peace and security must be condemned unequivocally by all of us, including by this Security Council. In this connection, we also underline that the use of double standards and selectivity in defending the principles of international law, including the principle of the prohibition of use or threat of use of force, would only undermine the integrity and purposes of the United Nations Charter. That would set a dangerous precedent for the violation of laws. Madam President, the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter moreover underscores the fact that the Secretary-General has a responsibility to defend the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. He must reject the deliberate and flagrant use of force against the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Director General of the IAEA also has a responsibility to promote the security and protection of nuclear facilities and to preserve the integrity of the IAEA's mandate. As such, he must denounce Israel's attacks against peaceful nuclear facilities in Iran. The Group of Friends in Defense of the United Nations Charter expresses its grave concern at the continued crimes committed by Israel, crimes committed to provoke and unleash conflicts in the Middle East. This has been demonstrated by their reiterated and grave violations of international law, together with their provocations and violations of countries in the region. These are events that demonstrate Israel's intention to exacerbate tensions on the ground and the fact that they are responsible for the consequences arising therefrom. To conclude, we wish to emphasize that it is incumbent upon all states pursuant to international law to refrain from providing aid or deliberate assistance to Israel in order to brutally perpetrate atrocity crimes against the Islamic Republic of Iran or any other nation of the region. At the same time, we point to the inherent right of the Islamic Republic of Iran to self-defense, this pursuant to international law. And we also point to the urgent need for the international community to demand that Israel be held accountable for all of their crimes against the Palestinian people and the region as a whole. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for his statement. And I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, head of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. Madam President, we expressed from the day one our deepest concern at the dangerous escalation that threatens to destabilize the Middle East following Israeli strikes on Iran and Iran's response. Today, we reiterate a strong commitment to regional security, including the security of the State of Israel, and call on all sides to abide by international law, show restraint, and refrain from taking further steps which could lead to serious consequences such as potential radioactive release. The European Union has always been clear that Iran must never be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon and is concerned about the IAEA's recent report, based on which the IAEA Board of Governors found Iran in non-compliance with its legally binding nuclear safeguards obligations under the NPT. But lasting security is built through diplomacy, not military action. We believe that diplomacy must prevail. The EU spares no effort to reduce tensions and to find a lasting solution to the Iranian nuclear issue, which can only be through a negotiated deal. Madam President, we, both EU member state ministers and the EU High Representative, have taken numerous bilateral contacts since the start of the conflict with all stakeholders, including phone conversations with our Iranian counterparts, to call on Iran to take decisive steps to return to negotiations and pave the way for a diplomatic solution. In this vein, the High Representative and the E3 ministers are meeting as we speak in Geneva the Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs. The meeting began this afternoon and it is ongoing. We will continue to engage for de-escalation, and in view of a lasting solution, we can be the only solution bringing peace and hope to the region. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Lambrinidis for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Secretary General for his sincere and guiding statement. I also thank USG DiCarlo and Director General Grossi for their briefings. Turkey condemns in the strongest terms the recent attacks conducted by Israel against Iran. These strikes constitute a manifest violation of the UN Charter, in particular the fundamental obligation on all member states to refrain from the use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of any state. We view the rapid escalation now unfolding across the Middle East with profound concern. Hundreds of lives have already been lost, and the risk for further bloodshed is alarming. Moreover, A wider regional collision will aggravate the risk of nuclear or radiological spillover and mass displacement, disrupt global trade and transportation routes, and imperil energy security at a moment of acute volatility. As a neighbor of Iran, Turkey reiterates the imperative of de-escalation, leading to an immediate ceasefire and a return to diplomacy. In that regard, we will fully support the Secretary General's call for maximum restraint and stand ready to assist all efforts aimed at halting the violence. Madam President, Israel's deliberate strikes against safeguarded nuclear facilities in Iran are unprecedented. They contravene international law, the statute of the International Atomic Energy Agency, relevant IAEA resolutions, and a Security Council resolution. These attacks must immediately stop. By targeting such installations, Israel has consciously placed nuclear safety and security at grave risk, with possible radiological dispersion that would endanger human health, biodiversity, and environment far beyond Iran's borders for decades to come. The IAEA's verification activities inside Iran have already been impeded. It is also deeply troubling that a non-NPT state, which maintains deliberate opacity regarding its own nuclear capabilities, is attacking the nuclear infrastructure of an NPT state under safeguards. This recklessness strikes at the heart of the global non-proliferation regime, compelling all of us to reflect upon its wider repercussions. The international community, especially this august body, must therefore unite in urging Israel to accede to the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as a non-nuclear weapons state and to accept robust IAEA verification. At the same time, concerns regarding aspects of Iran's nuclear program should be resolved through dialogue and strengthened cooperation between Iran and the agency. Turkey has consistently underscored that a diplomatic process remains the only viable route to settle the nuclear dispute and has supported and facilitated efforts toward that end. We continue to believe that diplomacy is the sole sensible path forward, and we call on all actors in a position to do so to exert their utmost efforts in this direction. Madam President, beyond the immediate nuclear risks, the security ramifications of this conflict are extensive. Energy security, which is inseparable from the national security, is now under severe threat. Strikes in one of the world's most sensitive regions for oil trade risk supply shortages and extreme price volatility, while the resulting uncertainties undermine long-term investments in vital infrastructure in the region. Hostilities have already disrupted sustainable transport, pushing up container and shipping costs and straining global supply chains. The destruction of urban areas and the natural environment further threatens biodiversity and jeopardizes regional and global sustainable development objectives. Madam President, we must not allow the crisis in Gaza to fade from the international agenda in the shadow of these latest events. Israel's assault on Iran cannot obscure the ongoing crimes being committed against the Palestinian people. Indeed, Israel's continued occupation of Palestinian territory remains the root cause of many conflicts across the region. A just, lasting, and comprehensive peace is attainable only through the recognition of an independent, sovereign, and contiguous state of Palestine within the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. International community must therefore press with urgency for an immediate cessation of hostilities in Gaza and Iran alike, and redouble efforts to implement the two-state solution. Imposing peace is no longer a mere option. It is an imperative to preserve the credibility of the UN system and to safeguard the international law. Failure to do so will only fuel a vicious cycle of violence and war. Madam President, this Council must act collectively and decisively to prevent further escalation. The risk of wider conflict, forced displacement on a massive scale, and irreversible environmental harm demands our immediate attention. Turkey stands ready to contribute constructively toward any initiative that will de-escalate tension, restore the ceasefire, and relaunch credible, meaningful diplomacy. Let us seize this moment to reaffirm our shared commitment to the UN Charter, to the global non-proliferation regime, and to the principles of peaceful dispute settlement. Only by resolute adherence to these norms can we hope to avert catastrophic consequences for the Middle East, for the international community, and for next generations. Madam President, I touch on the spillover effects and displacement in Iran. Of course, UN staff is not immune from that. To the knowledge of this Council, 45 UN staff has been evacuated to Turkey from Iran. This shows also that this Council must act. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkey for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.